Okay, so first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for what promises to be a very interesting and enlightening discussion. But I got a bunch of announcements I want to just run by you in the meantime. First of all, those of you on the steering committee are very much aware that it was 50 years ago on September 11th, 1973, that General Augusto Pinochet overthrew the democratic government of Salvador Allende. And ROCLA came into existence soon after that to present programs such as this one tonight. So stay tuned to our newsletter, and details will be coming out over the next few months as we prepare to make plans to celebrate our 50th anniversary throughout the year. And speaking about the newsletter, it just came out today. It should be in your email inbox if you're on the ROCLA email list. If you're not, just visit us at rocla.org and get signed up, so we can send you those notices and meeting notices. It's very impressive. We are very proud of it, thanks to the editorial prowess of Granny over there in one of the Hollywood squares, and webmastery of Marianne Reisig. So if you have ideas or suggestions that you'd like to see for
Hi, did Terry forget about the ROCLA?
the next issue, be sure to get it to Granny, would you? Or one of us on the steering committee. Now, I do have some sad news to report. We have lost a very good friend in solidarity with ROCLA and immigrants from Latin America. And he was a very dedicated, well-known journalist. And our friend Jim Goodman passed away this summer. He was a journalist, a friend, a consultant who helped us find interesting speakers for our programs. And his dedication and his in-depth reporting for the Democrat and Chronicle, and then later for the Progressive, shed light on the plight of those immigrating from Honduras and Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador, among others. He passed away this summer, and he will always be greatly missed by all of us who knew him. Now, moving along with some good news, we're pleased to announce that we are planning our rice and beans dinner again after a 3-year absence due to COVID. The event this year will be held at an outdoor venue at the Roundhouse Pavilion in Genesee Valley Park. And the date we've set for tentatively June 23rd. So save the date. And we're going to be honoring none other than our speaker this evening with the White Dove Award and the $20,000 cash prize that goes with that.
What?
I'm only kidding, Dan. Sorry.
We'd love to do it, Dan.
That was a good one. You got me on that.
Did he get your attention?
I like to do that to people. So cheers. Good for you, man. Good for you.
Now, our next meeting is going to be on Wednesday, October 5th. And that should be very timely, as it'll be immediately after the elections in Brazil, which I think are October 2nd. And our guest speaker that night is going to be Ana Cortez, who is a PhD candidate in political science with a master's degree in human rights and citizenship from the Department of Political Science at the University of Sao Paulo. Her research is focused on the role of evangelical churches in politics in Brazil. So with the election on October 7th or 2nd, she will no doubt have some very timely insights into the election results between Bolsonaro and Lula. So save that date. And I'd also like to encourage everyone to reach out to your congressman to urge him or her to help lift the Cuba embargo and the sanctions that are hurting the people of Cuba. Also urge them to continue the efforts to discontinue Title 42, which is being applied discriminately against Latin American immigrants, especially since COVID is no longer the danger it once was. And also, I wish she was on with us. She'll probably join us later, but just to let you know that ROCLA is co-sponsoring the Rochester Labor Film Festival again this year. It's already started, so please go online to rochesterlabor.org for the complete schedule. They have many interesting films this year as usual. It runs through October pretty much.
And Maryland provides us free tickets, so that's another plus.
So if you're at all interested, we're always looking for new members to join ROCLA and of course to join the steering committee. Hint, hint. So please visit our website at ROCLA.org and join us. Does anyone else have any brief announcements? Because I've already talked way too long.
Yes, I'd like to invite everyone to the Witness Palestine Film Festivals that will be at Little Theater at the end of October on Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon, the last couple weekends in October. These films are always excellent. There's always live or Zoomed contact with the filmmaker, and it's a way to find out what's going on in another part of the world where the US is involved in oppressing.
I'm sorry, Maxine, I accidentally muted you. Sorry. Maxine, can you unmute?
I guess so.
I'm sorry, my fault. Apologies.
That's all right.
So you're inviting everybody to, could you just repeat the invitation?
It was Beth Myers who made the invitation.
Okay, so maybe it was Maxine, did you make an announcement?
No,
Okay, so then it was my announcement, which is
Oh,
about the
sorry.
Witness. That's okay. The Witness Palestine Film Festival. This is our 11th
Right.
year of showing these excellent films. They're always at the Little Theater. And this year they're going to be on Saturday and Sunday afternoons at the end of October. And each film has a live or Zoomed contact afterwards with the filmmaker or someone who was involved in the film. So it's more than just watching the film. This is another area in the world where our country is doing the wrong thing, and we're working for justice there, as ROCLA does.
Thank you, Beth. Sorry about the mix up there. Anybody else? All right. Arnie, could you introduce your friend Dan to everybody? And most of us have already said hello to him, but if you wouldn't mind giving us a formal introduction, and then Dan, it'll be all yours.
Absolutely. Dan Kovalik is an American human rights and labor rights lawyer and peace activist. He's a graduate of Columbia University Law School. He teaches international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Dan is a friend of ROCLA. He has given presentations to ROCLA before, and as Tom mentioned, he will be honored with our International White Dove Award at the Rice and Beans Dinner on June 23rd, 2023. I also, on a personal note, he also agreed to give this presentation with only a week's notice, which makes him an even better friend of ROCLA, and we appreciate that. Dan has worked in solidarity with many countries, including Colombia, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. He has written a new book, Nicaragua, A History of U.S. Intervention and Resistance, which is due out in January 2023. If you can't wait that long, you can buy one of Dan's previous books. I counted 4, but there might be more. It's a privilege and a pleasure to introduce Dan Kovalik.
Well, thank you, Arnie. Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to be here with you this evening to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is Nicaragua. Obviously, I'm talking to the initiated for the most part, people who know a lot about Nicaragua, people who've been there. So hopefully I'm able to cover things that are new or maybe remind you of things that you had forgotten. I've been traveling there since 1987. I went for the first time when I was 19, and that changed my life. I mean, I was in Ocotal, Nicaragua, near the Honduran border during the war. And it really impacted how I saw the world in my own country, as it did many of us, right? I mean, I really, after that trip, lost the kind of naive belief that my country was a benevolent actor in the world, right? And certainly Nicaragua, it's hard to find a better example of where the US has really done a lot of damage there. So where to start? Obviously, Nicaragua continues to be intervened in by the US, but also continues to be a great source of controversy in the United States, even amongst the left. I'm sure you realize that and know that. And maybe it's a controversy even within your own group. I don't know. But even Democracy Now!, for example, in the last few years, their coverage has been very anti-Sandinista, very anti-Daniel Ortega. And this seems to be a very prevalent position, if not the predominant one in the American left and in what's left of the American peace movement, though there's not a lot of that left, which is too bad. But so let me talk about, I guess, let me start from the present and move backwards again, so that I don't cover ground you already know about. I've been to Nicaragua already 3 times this year. I was there for the July 19th celebration. I was there for Danielle's inauguration in January. And by the way, some of the people I spend a lot of time with there when I go now are a lot of expats who live there, including Brian Wilson, who just a few days ago commemorated the anniversary. It was the 35th anniversary of his losing his legs on the train tracks, protesting the movement of arms shipments to Central America. And that happened on September 1st, 1987. By the way, around the time I was just getting into Nicaragua at age 19, I remember hearing about that. And I assume everyone knows about Brian Wilson and knows about his story. He was a U.S. Army captain in Vietnam. And he became a staunch peace activist. And in 1987, he and some other veterans sat down on a train track to try to stop arms shipments to Central America. This was in California. And what maybe not all of you know about is that, after he lost his legs on the tracks, he was sued actually by some engineers of the railroad, saying he had caused them emotional distress by losing his legs on the tracks. Well, he countersued, and the long and short of it is discovery showed that the White House had ordered the train to run them down. And so the government ended up paying him about $1 million in reparations because it was not an accident. That's the key. In fact, if you talk to Brian, you say, well, God, that was terrible, your accident. He'll say, well, that was no accident, but he now lives in Granada, Nicaragua. He is very dedicated to Nicaragua, very dedicated to Sandinistas. He just got an honorary degree from the National University of Nicaragua. And I think that's important, because again, a lot of folks from the day have fled from Nicaragua and the Sandinistas, don't support them anymore. And Brian has remained a stalwart. And I think that's important. A lot of the folks, I know probably a dozen or so expats who still live there are still fighting for the revolution. And they're a huge connection that I have there, and important people to think about and be in touch with. The most recent polls that I saw from M&R Consulting, public opinion polls from July, show the Sandinista government with over 70% support of the Nicaraguan population. And that was a similar figure in January of this year. So the Sandinista government has massive popular support. So we need to start from that standpoint, that if you support the Sandinistas, and then, you're standing with the vast majority of the Nicaraguan people, and that has to be emphasized. Another interesting statistic you may or may not know about is that for years running, Nicaragua has been ranked near the top in the world for gender equality. For 3 years running, they were ranked number 5 in the world. They're now ranked number 7 in the world for gender equality. Now, this is amazing, right? The only countries that are ahead of it are Northern European countries, the usual suspects, Sweden, Finland, Norway, no other country in the hemisphere is better than Nicaragua on this issue, not the US, not Canada. And again, when we talk to people about Nicaragua who have concerns about the Sandinistas, I mean, I think that has to be pointed out, that they are solidly one of the top countries in the world for gender equality. And it's not by accident. They've worked very hard to reach that position, including having a constitution which requires that half of the General Assembly are women. And so again, I think it's important to really underscore that is one of many of their achievements. So as you know, I guess I'll do a little recap of the history just to kind of refresh everyone's recollection, because before I do that, let me say one other thing about Brian Wilson that I didn't know till recently. And this means a lot to me. So after Brian lost his legs, Rosario Murillo, the wife of Daniel Ortega and the vice president of the Republic of Nicaragua, flew to California with her children to visit and tend to Brian Wilson in 1987. Stayed with him for weeks. I did not know that till Brian told me that recently. That really made an impression on me, because she's all often vilified as well. And just to know that really quiet act of kindness that she paid to him is again, made a huge impression. Let me just say, Brian is really a saint in Nicaragua. I mean, at every event I've been to, major national event, Brian is always a special guest. And at every event, Danielle recounts his story, and I think, again, to me, that means quite a lot. They will never forget what Brian did for Central America. So just to recount a little history, as we know, the U.S. Marines invaded Nicaragua in 1909 to overthrow the government of President Jose Zelaya because he was doing unforgivable things like trying to provide social programs for the poor and education. He denied a gold mining concession to a Pittsburgh-based company, by the way, which was a big no-no. There are at least rumors he was going to work with the Japanese to build a canal through Nicaragua. So all this was anathema to the government, and the Marines were sent in under, of course, the leadership of General Smedley Butler, who we all know, repents later for his work for the Marines in defending U.S. Capitol. And Zelaya flees, his successor's overthrown, the U.S. puts in a puppet. He ends up being overthrown in a revolution, a very short-lived one, by a guy named Zeladian, who himself gets killed by the U.S. Marines. They then put in another puppet, and essentially from there until 1933, the U.S. Marines govern Nicaragua through various puppets. And the bankers from New York take over Nicaragua's finances. The mining industries from the U.S. Are able to act at will. And again, the people are neglected. The poor stay poor and very, very poor. And the presidents that rule there essentially, embezzle billions of dollars and from the coffers, are very corrupt. And this is, what U.S. domination looked like. As you know, through the efforts of Augusto Sandino, the Marines are forced to leave Nicaragua in 1933. But before they do so, they've set up the National Guard under Anastasio Somoza. And as you know, Sandino's invited to Managua to sign a peace agreement. He's invited to a big state dinner with the president. And on his way from the dinner, he's murdered by Somoza's National Guard. Somoza declares himself president. And again, as you all know, from 1934 till 1979, Somoza and his two sons rule Nicaragua with an iron hand. The Sandinistas are founded in 1961, gather steam, particularly after the earthquake of 1972, in which Somoza is really exposed for stealing all the aid money that's coming in for the earthquake, right? This becomes a big issue, not only for the Nicaraguans, even the New York Times covers it. Being a Pittsburgher, I'm painfully aware that the great one, Roberto Clemente, who played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, dies bringing aid to Nicaragua because he went there knowing Somoza was stealing the aid, so he decided to bring aid himself and his plane crashes. In 1978 is the big insurrection of the Sandinistas against Somoza. In this year, 78 to 79, Somoza, desperate to cling to power with US support, bombed 6 of his own cities. Kills 50,000 Nicaraguans in the last year of the insurrection. 50,000 in a country of not even 3 million people. I mean, this is catastrophic, right? But as we know, the Sandinistas are victorious nonetheless. But before, they're able to get to work, the US is already plotting against them. Jimmy Carter flies out National Guardsmen on planes marked with Red Cross insignia, which is a war crime, to Honduras. Reagan will pick those people up when he takes office and will found and finance and train the Contras, with, of course, the help of the Argentine fascist junta at that time. Meanwhile, the Sandinistas, of course, are engaged in land reform, trying to do a major literacy program, which was very successful. 100,000 people volunteered for that, free medical aid. They're trying to develop the country, but the US will not let them breathe. So really, even as early as 1981, 2 years after the triumph, the Contras are already attacking Nicaragua. And the Contra Wars, we know, lasts until 1990, kills another 30,000 people, right? That's on top of the 50,000 killed in the last year of the insurrection. We know, of course, again, it's not bad to be reminded that in 1987, first of all, in 1984, the Sandinistas win the first free and fair elections against other parties in Nicaragua. This was a huge victory for democracy there, because a lot of people forget about the 1984 election. In 1987, the US Congress finally cuts off aid to the Contras because they realize, okay, these are bad guys. But as we know, Reagan continued to fund the Contras by selling arms to Iran and by selling cocaine on the streets of the United States, right? Let's not forget that. The lengths the US has gone to, right? To try to overthrow the Sandinistas. In 1990, finally, the people of Nicaragua cry uncle, right? The Sandinistas agree to hold early elections, and the US makes it clear, you vote for the Sandinistas, we're going to continue the Contra War, we're going to continue sanctions, and we won't give you any aid. But you vote for Violeta Chamorro, we'll turn on the spigot, we'll trade with you, war will end. Well, of course, as Don Corleone would say, they made them an offer they couldn't refuse. And so the Nicaraguan people vote the Sandinistas out, Violeta Chamorro takes over, and this begins the rule of the neoliberals from 1990 to 2007. And these are very dark years. A lot of people don't know about these years. A lot of the left and the peace movement forgot about Nicaragua after 1990, but these were very dark times. The neoliberals did nothing to try to rebuild Nicaragua. They did nothing to electrify the country. By the time Ortega retakes power in 2007, the country's 50% unelectrified. About 50% of the country doesn't have running water. The roads still aren't paved, right? By the last year of the neoliberal rule, there's parts of the country that in fact experience a famine. A very desperate period. Finally, Ortega is reelected in 2006, takes power in 2007. He reestablishes free education, reestablishes free healthcare, both of which were destroyed by the neoliberals, begins the land reform again. A lot of that, by the way, the other thing to point out, it was very important. It wasn't like Danielle and the Sandinistas were sleeping between 1990 and 2007. They were organizing, they were fighting the neoliberals, trying to defend the land reform they already did, because the neoliberals were trying to give land back to the oligarchs. The US even conditioned aid to Nicaragua, right, on those governments giving it back to the oligarchs. So the Sandinistas were still very much organizing and trying to defend the gains that they had already made, and obviously trying to also organize politically so they could retake power eventually through elections. And I think the thing again, I have to just emphasize here, there may be no other revolution you can think of, okay, where the revolution is won through arms, and that was by necessity, of course, in Nicaragua, where those same revolutionaries who won through arms lose an election and then step down, and then have to struggle to then win an election to come back to power. Can you think of any other historical antecedent for this? There aren't any, right? And that's one of the amazing things about the Sandinista revolution. I mean, they've done it in the most benign way they could do it. They suspended the death penalty, right, when they took power. Not only that, they let a lot of National Guardsmen go, let them go to Honduras. This was not a revolution that ever had a terror like the French had, like the Russians had, like the Chinese had, like the Cubans had. They had some of those show trials, shot a bunch of people. This didn't happen in Nicaragua, right? And they're a multi-party state. I mean, that's the other thing that really I have to emphasize. It's strange to me that you have people who support Cuba, which I do, very, very strongly support Cuba. But let's face it, Cuba's a one-party state. It always has been, right, since the revolution. And yet they don't support Nicaragua because they find it somehow to have a democracy deficit, even though they're a multi-party state. I find that very odd and I don't know how you reconcile that. In the last election, which was in November of 2021, the Sandinistas ran against 6 other parties. And they won. About 65% of the people voted, and the Sandinistas got about 75% of the vote. And by the way, polls before the election predicted that's pretty much how it was going to go. So the vote seemed to comply with the popular sentiment. And so since, again, 2007, with the exception of 2018, and I'll get to that, we have to talk about 2018. With the exception of that year, Nicaragua has had 5% GDP growth every year, even during the pandemic. Again, has built 26 world-class hospitals, have paved roads. In fact, when you go through Nicaragua, you're either going to drive on brand new paved roads or you're going to be stuck in construction, because they are building. They are really building an infrastructure in this country. They built a road between Managua and Bluefields for the first time ever. You can drive from Managua to Bluefields on the Atlantic coast. Nicaragua is now the only country that has autonomous regions. Someone says they're having trouble hearing me. Are other people having trouble hearing me? Okay. Nicaragua is the only country in the hemisphere that has 2 autonomous regions for the indigenous peoples on the Atlantic coast. I mean, the gains have been amazing, and that's why the polls are so strong for Danielle and the Sandinistas. Now, as I mentioned, we have to now talk a little bit what happened in 2018, because in the summer of 2018, as most of you know, I'm sure the shit hit the fan. And a lot of what happened was very confusing to people, first of all, in Nicaragua, initially, but certainly to people in the solidarity movements of the West, in the US, Europe, which is understandable. I mean, even I was like, what the hell's going on? Because in October of 2017, so we're talking whatever it is, the unrest begins in April of 2018, okay? In October 2017, so we're talking 6-7 months, Ortega's polling at 80% approval, okay? So that has to be kept in mind. Very popular president. Now, all of a sudden in April, he announces very modest Social Security reforms that had to be made to keep Social Security solvent, okay? But these were modest. First of all, they required corporations to make the biggest contributions to Social Security, did require some increased contributions from workers, added some benefits to Social Security. But in any case, there were some changes, some good, some bad. And then we're to believe that because of this, all of a sudden, Danielle, who's massively popular, that the population then rebels against him, and that the leaders are students, right? So all of a sudden, students care about Social Security. I mean, this is very strange, right? What is claimed initially, which you may remember, is that there were peaceful demonstrations, that the police, who, by the way, up to this point, are winning awards and being, commended for being some of the best community-oriented police in the hemisphere, that they begin shooting and killing students. Well, this didn't happen. This was fabricated. There was a major social media and mainstream media disinformation campaign, which was claiming students were being shot, that all of a sudden this police force, again, that was popular from a popular government, was shooting students who somehow cared about Social Security, and somehow peaceful protests that were protesting Social Security threatened the government. But it didn't happen. The first person killed was a police officer. And throughout that summer, 22 police officers were killed by peaceful protesters. And what we know happened was that groups that had received millions of dollars from the National Endowment for Democracy of the US, some young people claiming to be students, some real students, and others had been organizing for a long time with the help, by the way, of sectors of the Catholic Church, to engage in a violent insurrection to overthrow the government. And that is what began in April of 2018. And yes, there are some protesters who were killed during this period, even early on, but it was in response to the fact that they were firing on police officers and others. And as the time went on that summer, it got very ugly, where they were organizing murders of Sandinista militants. I mean, they literally, these opposition was marking homes in a biblical type way of old-time Sandinista militants to be assassinated. They were destroying Sandinista monuments. They were destroying government buildings, including the historic building in Granada, Nicaragua, that dated back to the 1500s, that even William Walker had not destroyed, okay? And we were led to believe that the Sandinistas were destroying their own buildings and their own monuments, which made no sense because they weren't doing it. And what happened is the protesters, so-called, brought in drug gangs from other Central American countries. They were paying people drugs and money and alcohol to man what were known as these tranques, which were these barricades throughout various cities. There were thousands of these, which crippled the economy, stopped all international trade. In fact, there were these poor truckers from other Central American countries that were stuck on the Pan American Highway for months with their cargo. These people, I don't know what happened to them. I'm sure they lost everything. Stuck between the Honduran border and Costa Rican border, trying to deliver sometimes food which spoiled or whatever. So the economy is wrecked. You know, again, a number of significant buildings are destroyed. In the end, 200 people are killed in this summer of insurrection. Now, here's the interesting little part about this, which you may or may not know. So Danielle, as he usually does, and he's done since the beginning, he tried to reconcile and have a dialogue with the major players, including the Catholic Church, Sept, the major corporate, kind of their chamber of commerce, student groups, including some of the protesters, to try to resolve the crisis very early on, though the church at first kind of dragged their feet in order to try to provoke more violence, by the way, that they could justify to do what they did, and that is to go to the bargaining table and demand that Danielle resign. And that was the main call of the opposition, right? That this guy, again, who had 80% popular approval a few months ago, now has to resign. And the first call, and this is where the rubber hits the road. The first thing the church asked for, in addition to Danielle leaving, was they claimed, of course, the police are the ones committing the violence. So they tell Danielle, take the police off the streets. And you know what Danielle's response was? Okay. So for 50 days, the police were contained to their barracks. And Danielle, who's a brilliant strategist, I think one of the greatest leaders, by the way, revolutionary leaders, he doesn't get enough credit. What he knew is the following. One, he's going to listen. Okay, the church tells me to do it, so I'll do it. But what else he knew is the people were confused. A lot did believe the police were out killing people, killing students. So his view was, okay, let's see who's committing the violence. The police will be in their barracks. Let's see what happens. The violence didn't stop because it wasn't the police who were committing it. It was the insurrectionists on these tranques. By the way, who went, in particular in a place like Masaya, Nicaragua, attacked the police barracks with the police peacefully inside it. Killed a number of police officers there. I don't know, but how many, but when I was there was pictures of them outside of all the dead police officers. It could have been 10 or something. So very quickly, people got unconfused. They began to understand who the bad guys were and who was destroying the economy and who, and again, why would the Sandinistas destroy their own economy? That makes no sense, right? And so what happens is the people begin to say, police, can you come back? And also what happens is, and this is an important fact, the historic combatants, and when I say historic, I mean the guys who overthrew Somoza, they begin to organize again. And they go to their floorboards and they dig their AKs out. And they go and start cleaning up the tranques. They say enough is enough. This is even before the police move in. The historic combatants begin to fight back. And very quickly, the Tranques get cleared. And again, without much need for the police to even act, because the people are acting led by the historic combatants. And this is a fact you're not going to hear from a lot of people, including Amy Gooden. And so I get to Nicaragua. At this time, what a lot of people have told me, and what certainly was my experience, was that the events in 2018 had a silver line. What the Sandinistas learned was you can never put your guard down. You can't stop organizing. You can't stop educating, because the U.S. is relentless. They will always take advantage of you sleeping. But who else learned that was people in the Solidarity, like myself, who had not been as vigilant as about Nicaragua as they should have been, because it seemed like everything was going great, right? This is when I met a lot of these expats in Nicaragua. We start talking, we start writing, and now those people are some of my best friends, right? We've become very close. And so what was good about it is we learned, okay, we all have to be vigilant. So I went down for the July 19th celebrations in 2018. And I got there a few days in advance. And I'll just give you a few anecdotes because I think they're significant. Oh, the first person I met with was a woman named Adania Castillo, who's the head of Cinematique, which is their national film board. Very intelligent, lovely woman. And she was the first person who met our delegation. And by the way, delegation was me, Max Blumenthal, and Thomas Hedges, Chris Hedges' son. And she just sobbed to us. And she said something that I'll never forget. She said, do you know, there was a time a few months ago, I thought we could never wave the red and black flag again. Because the goal of the insurrection was not only to overthrow Daniel, it was to destroy Sandinissimo forever, to eradicate every memory of it. And there was a moment when it appeared to some that could have happened. I mean, that's an incredible thing. And she was just sobbing, you know. Emotions were so raw because this was just as the Tranques were being cleared. The last Tranques were cleared in Masaya and Monimbo, which had been the real ground zero of the revolution, but also became ground zero of the counter-revolution in 2018, and not by accident. Right? They tried to convert those places into now the ground zero of the counter-revolution. And by the way, one of the people who was instrumental in that was someone that is really popular among some of the folks on the left here, Dora. I'm forgetting what's her name, Dora, the MRS woman. It'll come to me. I should look it up, but she was organizing there in support of this counter-revolution. Dora, she's in jail, by the way, now. And people try to tell you, oh, she's some political prisoner. She was helping organize these Tranques in Masaya very early on. Dora Maria Tellus. And so it was interesting. So then I met on July, I guess it was 18th. I met with John Perry and his wife, Abby. Abby's a Nicaraguan, old-time Sandinista from her youth when she was 6 years old. John Perry's from Britain, but he's married to her. He's a Sandinista loyalist. And I met with them right the day before the July 19th celebrations, and they live in Monimbo. Okay, so their town was just liberated, and that's how they viewed it the day before on July 17th. And again, Abby is sobbing for an hour to us about what had happened, about the Tranques that were set up, about being harassed every day on these Tranques, trying to just cross from one part of the town to the other. And she said, I was not afraid to be killed. I was afraid to be raped by the people on the trunk because they were doing that. They were raping people, stealing stuff from people, harassing people, killing people. I mean, this is the type of people we were told were the peaceful protesters. And it was amazing to hear this from people who had gone through it. And then, by the way, I mean, the country was torn apart. You know, it was like the Civil War, brother versus brother. A family member of hers turned to the other side, became part of the insurrection, and disappeared for a while because she then lost heart in the insurrection. And she was afraid people in the insurrection were going to kill her. So she disappeared, but left her kids with Abby and John, 2 girls. And after she reappeared, the older girl said, I'm not going back with you, Mom. She's 11 years old, okay? And she said, I'm a Sandinista. I ain't going back with you. I'm going to stay with Abby, I mean, which is incredible, right? Nicaragua kids are very precocious because they have to be, right? And then on July 19th, 2018, again, this was a huge celebration because it wasn't just celebrating now the Sandinista Revolution of 1979, it was celebrating the end of this horrible summer. And I was there in the plaza. By the way, the Pope John Paul II Plaza, which is very funny because he was not a fan of the Sandinista Revolution, but that's where the big events are held, the Pope John Paul II Plaza. And it was bedlam. People were so happy because they had just come out of this horrible counter-revolutionary period again. It looked exactly, or not exactly, but it had so many of the same elements they went through in the 80s, right? And, you know, I just walked amongst the crowd and people were dancing and drinking, and it was incredible. And Danielle comes, you know, he gives a speech. And by the way, here's another thing you won't hear a lot. And if I can play it, I will try to play it. I don't know if you've heard the song that was playing. Yeah, can I play a few bars during this summer? I heard it everywhere. And I can attest to the fact that when I was there, it was the big song of 2008, the summer of 2018. And I'm going to play a few bars. And it was written by a peasant mariachi band in Nicaragua. Okay. And again, you're not going to hear this from the Danielle detractors because this song and its popularity very much belie claims about Danielle. Can you hear it? Danielle, Danielle, the people are with you. So there you go. So, I mean, all it's saying is, you know, this Matagalpa's with you and Leon's with you, Managua's with you, all of Nicaragua's with you, Danielle. And Danielle Sequeda means, of course, Danielle stays. That's all it means. They were saying leave, and this song said Danielle stays. And this was huge. People were making videos of themselves singing the song or dancing in front of a recording of the song. And you still see that, by the way. It's still a big song. And it was played at the July 19th event, and it was amazing. And again, by the end of the summer, people realized who was what and what was what. And they realized who the good guys were and who the bad guys were. And Danielle came out on top. I mean, and that was an amazing thing. And largely came out on top by not pushing forward, but by retreating having a tactical retreat with the police in the barracks. By the way, the Army, which is thoroughly Sandinista, never came out. The general's position was, the head of the Army was, we defend the motherland from foreign invaders. Our job is not to get involved with domestic disputes. They never left their barracks, ever. And as I said, the police retreated to their barracks for 50 days. So, and as I said, as we sit here today, Danielle has firm support of the people. I think that the revolution is stronger than it ever has been. Yes, the revolution is now finally doing what it had to do to defend itself and the people, and that is arrest some of these people who organized horrible violence, including some Catholic priests. They found weapons caches in churches. There's pictures and videos of priests overseeing torture. You know, there's some bad guys. The truth is, most of the Catholic Church, at least in terms of the priests and the hierarchy, is pretty bad now in Nicaragua. It's right wing, Opus Dei even. The popular church still exists, but you know, it's really amongst the people, not amongst, for the most part, the clergy, and certainly not the bishops. The only exception I know is the Bishop of Leon is pretty decent. And so they're doing what they need to defend themselves. But I mean, again, the polls show that the people actually support that more than anything. I mean, they support that by about 90%. They don't want another 2018, you know. So anyway, I've spoken now for almost an hour. So that is my main thing. Obviously, you probably have some questions, comments, but that is my presentation in chief.
Well, very good presentation as well. Thank you. We'll take the next like 15 minutes or so for questions and answers with you, Dan.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
I have a question. Do you know what the status is? About a year, maybe 2 years ago already, there was a leaked paper about the Renaissance Act and RAIN, where they were already planning against overthrowing the Nicaraguan government before the elections were even held. Do you know what the status is? Are you seeing?
Yeah, so the
changes that being
Renaissance,
implemented?
yeah. So the NICA Act has passed. That was a major sanctions bill. The Renaissance Act was signed the day after Danielle won the elections, right? To show what, right? To show really what everything was about. Biden signed it into law the day after Danielle won. They're now threatening to cut off all trade with Nicaragua. That's the latest thing on the table. They've already cut off preferential treatment for Nicaraguan sugar that's been in effect for many years. And they're threatening to cut off Nicaragua from the free trade agreement. So the US is getting very close to full economic warfare against Nicaragua. And by the way, all these folks in the opposition, the people lionize, like Dora Maria Tellez and Sergio Ramirez, they all support these sanctions. I mean, there's no justification for these sanctions. They just hurt poor people. I mean, no one disputes that. Like, you can't be a patriot, I'm sorry, of Nicaragua and support this economic warfare against this country, you know. But that opposition, or at least that portion of it, is not loyal opposition. They are our disloyal opposition. They are traitors in a very big way.
Anybody else have some questions? Just unmute yourself or raise your hand. I'll try and call on you.
Yeah, I have I have a question. I guess I'm well, first of all, I want to thank you for a really wonderful presentation. I learned a lot, even though I did know some, but I learned a lot. Thank you. I guess the question I have is, when the National Endowment for Democracy kind of worms its way into a country like Nicaragua specifically, do they work with elites? Is that who they work with? Or try to get in? I guess I don't have a good sense of like what portion of the population in Nicaragua would be open to working with the United States.
Well, it's a great question. First of all, the amount of money they're giving to Nicaragua is astounding, given how, again, there's only 6 million people in Nicaragua, and the US is giving many millions of dollars. I forget, some person figured it out that it's many dollars per person, right? So it's a lot of money in a
Right.
country where people are pretty poor and don't make a lot of money. So first of all, a lot of people are very susceptible to just taking the money despite any ideology, just because they need the money. But yes, they do work with elites, certainly. The Chamorros, they've always been supporting, but also some business groups. But yeah, they have found other NGOs that, you know, seem to be popular, to have certain popular leanings or whatever, student groups, basically. But, you know, yeah, there are plenty of people that are open to it because sadly, a lot of people are for sale, you know, especially in a poor country. A little money there goes a long, long way. So it's not hard to buy people off, and they do. You know, the CIA has basically been bankrolling the La Prensa newspaper for decades, you know. So yeah, it's not hard. It's not hard to get people on board with this. And then of course you do have some ideologically committed, like some of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, obviously some people in the bourgeoisie, from the oligarchic families who've never accepted the Sandinistas. Those people are always happy to work with the NED and others to overthrow the government. And then they find people, again, you know, from the streets or whatever, to help out with whatever they're doing. And again, in a country like that, especially, you're always going to find people who are willing to do that. So,
Dan, we have a question in our chat that says NPR has kind of established themselves as our liberal media, quote unquote. How have they been representing Nicaragua?
yeah, well, NPR is I think it's excellent to ask about NPR. I listened to it pretty carefully. And it is important to listen to it because you're right. It is the liberal, I would say it is the radio of the Democratic Party. It really reflects the ideology of the Democratic Party. And so on issues of race and gender, they're pretty enlightened. They're pretty decent for the most part on domestic issues. But on international issues, it's straight State Department stuff. So they are very critical of Danielle, very critical of Venezuela, very critical of Cuba, very forgiving of Bolsonaro in Brazil, very critical of Syria. You know, it's just straight State Department. And actually, I find it very insidious because it does work on liberals. Because, right, you're hearing the jazz, and then you get a nice thing on a movie that's targeted to the LBGT community, and then you get this crap about Nicaragua, and you're like, oh wow, well I just heard these other things which were pretty enlightened, so I guess Nicaragua must be bad, you know. So I mean, I agree. I mean, NPR is a great litmus test on this stuff because I think it does work on liberals. But it is straight State Department pro-war. I mean, that is my view. I think it's very insidious in that way. And it's hard for me to listen to their international coverage for that reason. It makes me angry, but I stick with it because I think it's important to understand how that stuff is being churned out, you know.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? Bruce?
Yeah, Dan, two questions. Where were the Nicaraguan trade unions in the conflict?
Well,
And
they were, for the most part, solidly in support of the Danielle.
Okay.
Including the biggest peasant union, I believe, in the hemisphere. That's the ATC. they were solidly behind Danielle. Danielle was working with the unions. And can I tell you a couple things about that, in fact? So COSEP, the National Chamber of Commerce in Nicaragua, again, to really put the nail in the coffin to the Sandinistas, called for a national strike. And the union said, hell no, we ain't striking. They made sure the companies kept running because they wanted the economy to keep producing. And this agricultural workers did the same. The big reason that the coup didn't work was because food kept being produced by the peasants and kept getting to market. So no one went hungry during this period. And that was because the workers and the peasants took things into their own hand to defend the revolution.
Second question. Is the AFL-CIO, you remember the heyday of the American Institute of Free Labor Development?
AFL-CIA, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, by the way, in most of my years in the labor movement, which are over 40, more money went into the AFL-CIO from the CIA and the State Department than dues money. It's amazing. I mean,
I think that's still true, by the way.
all you got to do is look at the books. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's pretty open about it. Yeah.
no secret. Was there any involvement in Nicaragua or elsewhere? Is this, were we able to put an end to that shit, or is that still going on with the AFL-CIO?
I think the answer is the worst excesses have ended as far as I know. The last big thing I know they did was support the coup against Chavez in 2002. They were very instrumental in that. But I don't know of any other type of activity like that since. I do think they continue to support some right-wing, unions in various countries, and to that extent aren't great. But I don't think they're as openly pro-coup as they used to be. I think, again, the more radical kind of right-wing things, I think they're not as engaged in. But the thing is, we don't always know till after they happen. Like, I didn't know that about Venezuela till after the coup. So, yeah. But I think, I guess I'd say to a large extent it's ended, but I don't think in fully.
Dan, it's surprising to me that democracy now isn't strong supportive of the Sandinistas. Have you talked with Amy Goodman at all?
I have not, but I can tell you some people who have. I mean, one is my friend Jaime who's the Nicaraguan ambassador to the United Nations in New York City. And he's been very disappointed with them. I'll tell you why democracy. First of all, Democracy Now! Was also bad on Libya, supported the Libya invasion. I think Amy Goodman has, again, on some of these issues, has gotten off track, as a lot of liberals have. But on Nicaragua in particular, I think there's a few reasons why people like Amy Goodman have gone off the rails. And that is because of old personal relationships that they have with people like Dora Maria Tellez, right? Who has been whispering in their ears for years against the Sandinistas, and they trust these people, and they're not trustworthy people. But some of it is because of those relationships. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. Democracy Now!'s coverage of Nicaragua has been about as bad as anybody's on this. And it's a shame, and I can only account for it, as I said, in part because of funding, but also because of relationships with some of the people who were involved in the insurrection in 2018,
We have time for a couple more questions. Dan, if you're willing,
Yeah,
hang in there a few more minutes.
yes, I can.
It came up in the chat box. Forgive me because it's been a while since I saw a debate on Nicaragua within ROCLA. There was a student who came to that meeting via internet who claimed to be a target of the government. Can you talk about students with this kind of message?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, during that period, especially in 2018, there were these students, or some were really students, some were just young people claiming to be students, who were working hand in glove with the NED, who were meeting with people like Marco Rubio, who were organizing against the insurrection. I mean, or with the insurrection against the government. So it doesn't surprise me at all that someone like that would, and they were touring the US, and even some, again, kind of left groups had these people go talk to their group right after they had met in Florida with Marco Rubio. You know, I mean, there just was so little discernment about who these people were and what they were pushing. But that's who I suspect you heard from, was someone like that.
Yeah, I think that was probably the meeting that we held, and there was a dialogue between Michael Argaman and Arnie Matlin. I was out of town, I think out of state actually for that meeting, and I was so disappointed I missed it because I guess it was pretty fired up. I don't know if Arnie, if you want to unmute and add anything to that or not. I'll assume that he's good. He's sitting in his living room listening to us, but probably can't get to the computer to reply. But anyhow, I think that's what you're talking about, Paul, and thank you for that question. Okay, anybody else have any other questions? Grania, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Grania.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have some coordination issues. Yes, what do you think are the media in English in the US that are actually, if any, that are actually reliable to read? Not books too, but just media.
Yeah, well, first of all, the ones I'm going to tell you are not real mainstream, but I can give you some good ones. I like the Orinoco Tribune, which is a website-based news out of Venezuela that's excellent on these things. One that I found during the 2018 insurrection that is excellent is something called Tortilla con Sal,
Right.
which is really good. What else? I mean, those are the two that really jump out at me. Again, the ones that are good are kind of independent ones. Popular Resistance, the Alliance for Global Justice, which has newsletters and different things. Nika Notes is still being done through them, which has been around for a long, long time. Those are the things that come to mind. Again, none of them are like, I can't think of any mainstream press. I mean, that's just the truth. I mean, I think that journalism in this country has really declined. And not because they disagree with me, but because you don't even hear the other side. I mean, that's the thing. It's not, it's just so one-sided. So I go to those other journals I can mention, you know.
What about Counterpunch?
Counterpunch, you know, yeah, I mean, sure, it's fine. It can go either way on these things, but that's fine. And they, you know, they may have one for, one against, and that's fine. I mean, I'm all for that. I do think Counterpunch is pretty decent, certainly. Yeah. Oh, there, and by the way, Covert Action magazine, which was dormant for a while, is back online and is really putting out great stuff. And I've been writing for them. So check that out, Covert Action magazine, which is being run by Chris Agee, the son of Phil Agee, who most of you probably know, the ex-CIA guy, Phil Agee. His son is running it now. So check that out.
Okay, I'm going to ask Arnie to close us out. I think he's got a comment, and then we'll let him close us out for the evening. And thank you, Dan. Go ahead, Arnie.
Well, the closeout comment is, I'll save that because I want to compliment Dan. But first, let me say, when the Sandinistas had supporters in the U.S. in the 80s, they sent their brightest and best people to make connections and bring support back to Nicaragua. So Dora Maria Tejas was a true Revolutionary War hero. She's very kind of charismatic, and the same with the vice president, who was a
Sergio
filmmaker.
Ramirez. Yeah.
Yeah, and these people, they were the best Nicaragua had to send. They didn't send workers and peasants and people who had fought in the revolution because they wanted the U.S. to see their brightest and best, as they perceived it. But it turned out to bite them then, because those people were revolutionary people. I mean, they had that message, but when they didn't feel they got enough share of the power, they turned around and became counter-revolutionaries, which they are now. But as Dan pointed out, they have connections. And people wrote, "Oh, Dora Maria is starving." I got that email. They made a movie, which I don't recommend, called Las Sandinistas, which went along for an hour and 15 minutes, and a good story of women in the revolution, and ended up with how Daniel Ortega is now crushing women. And it's simply a lie. So the problem is that we have Counterpunch, and they have the New York Times and the Washington Post, and it's very discouraging to try to counter the lies. But one way we do it is by inviting Dan Kovalik to speak to ROCLA and hear for yourself what the truth is. He's just, the people who are reporting about from the Times and the Post don't go to Nicaragua. They go to the State Department, get the State Department, what are we supposed to say today? And they say it, but Dan doesn't do that. So it's a great, really an honor and privilege to have you here, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was my pleasure. I had a great time, and I appreciate you. And I look forward to seeing you this summer.
We're looking forward to hosting you there, Dan. So we'll look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this evening's presentation. And again, I'm doing it on such short notice.
Thank you, my friends. Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.
Okay. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.